with a purpose, we're taking it higher. Fighting through the struggle, igniting the fire. No more silence, we'll make the noise loud. Together in this battle, standing strong and proud. Injustice fades when courage aligns. Rise up together, break the confines. We're the voices that won't be ignored. Breaking chains, yeah, we're ready for war. With the power of the people, we'll make them see a world of justice, united and free. United and free. United and free. So rise up now, it's our time to shine. Together we'll write a new paradigm. You paradigm, you paradigm.
We have this person.
I know this keeps happening.
I know.
Yeah.
And I have this way to be up here because it's one of these person.
I was here. I didn't
I know. If you want to talk to the Judge, can we approach it for a second? He's way up to what's
Everybody should make sure it's
Yeah. He's a officer. I don't know why. He's an officer. Baker. Yes, it is.
Yeah, well, she wrote it on, Melanie wrote it on you. Yeah, but I'm marking on here that I don't know.
Thank you. I got it. But just hold it. I got it.
We'll see. I'll get
so that was
I'm gonna talk to her. All right, this is a combined case. We'll cover that on the state versus Victoria Tippett on the charges, arrest warrant ending in 1936, 1937, and 1938 on respective charges of accessory after the fact, A, B, C, or murder, misprision of a felony, and obstructing justice, and the next defendant, Kendall Mims, on arrest warrant 1933, 1934, and 1935 on the subsequent charges of accessory after the fact to felony A, B, or C murder, misprision of a felony, and obstructing justice. I see that, is everyone agreeing to hold these preliminary examinations at the same time?
Yes, Your Honor.
Both
Yes, Your
parties
Honor.
with attorneys for the defendants, and I don't think there's any objection from the solicitor's office.
No, sir, Your Honor.
I always say this, on cases such as these, I realize that these cases can be emotional, and I accept that fact. I know there may be victims, families in the courtroom. Please understand that my first priority is to protect the process and to protect the quorum in the courtroom, so if there's any emotional outburst, I will remove you and or clear the courtroom for just the parties to be here. But I always say that just as a warning. So do we have any objection to waiving the reading of the warrants?
None from the defense, Your Honor.
None from all. All right. Solicitor, if you would call your first file.
Yes, sir, Judge. State calls Steve Westcott.
Okay, Officer Westcott, if you would approach the stand, be prepared to be sworn. And if you would raise your right hand and be prepared to be sworn, do you swear and affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
All right, please answer any questions that the solicitor has for you.
Officer Westcott, can you state your full name and your position with the Pendleton PD for the court?
Officer Stephen Westcott, I'm a patrolman with Pendleton Police Department.
And all the parties are aware of this, but just for the court's knowledge, you are not the affiant on these warrants, but you are the chief investigative officer, lead investigator in this case, correct?
Yes, sir.
And did the offenses that led to these warrants relate to Ms. Mims and Ms. Tippett? For Ms. Mims, the warrant ending in 933, 934, and 935, and the warrant ending in 936, 937, and 938 relating to Ms. Tippett. Did those offenses happen in Anderson County and more specifically within the city of Pendleton?
Yes, sir.
This case has a lot of background, but can you tell the court how you established probable cause for these warrants and how your investigators and officers in this case established probable cause?
Yes, sir. I'm going to go back to an incident which was not this incident. On July 31st, myself and Officer Bishop went to Jessica Barnes' mother's residence at 456 Jackson Street on a civil disturbance. At the end of it, Jessica Barnes was transported via ambulance to the admin hospital. Separating from that, on the 10th of September, Ms. Romara, Jessica's mother, came into the office to report her daughter as missing. So about a month and a half it transpired.
So this case started out as a missing persons case, correct?
Yes, sir, on the 10th of September.
And just for the court, for the record, the underlying felony that took place was a murder, correct?
Correct.
And who's the defendant that's charged with murder?
Brandon Barnes,
Okay.
Jessica's other.
All right, now let's, from the date of the murder, what's the date of the murder?
They're determined that to be the 1st of August.
Okay, August 1st or August 2nd, somewhere in that time frame. Can you just tell the court now relating to obstruction, accessory after the fact, and misprision of felony, what these defendants and what their activity was to lead to those warrants from August the 1st or 2nd until the time that they were actually arrested?
On the 10th of September, after Ms. Romara had reported her daughter missing to us, we went to the address at 102 Laurel Drive and made contact with Brandon Barnes, Victoria Tippett, and Kendall Mims at the pool house located at that address. Again, the initial investigation was speaking with the three of them concerning the report of a missing person for Jessica Barnes. The answers that we were given that date, one of which was a written voluntary statement from Victoria Tippett, were that Victoria said she was the last person to have seen Jessica Barnes on 31 July is what she wrote on her written statement. That she had come to the pool house, walked to the pool house. Victoria said that she had been outside walking, holding Valentina, the baby of Kendall, when she saw Jessica go to the pool house. Victoria went in the pool house still holding Valentina, said that there was a conversation with Jessica, asked her where, what she was doing. She said she was packing some belongings going to Michigan, but she wouldn't give any further information. Victoria then said that Jessica then left, and that was the last she had seen.
Judge, may I object for just a minute? May we approach the
It hasn't already been said.
Yes, sir, twice.
Officer Westcott, can you, when we refer to the minor child, can we just refer to them as the minor child?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And you can keep going forward. So you were at the point where Ms. Tippett had given you all a voluntary statement.
After we got the voluntary statement from Ms. Tippett, it was verbal from Ms. Mims.
Can you hold on? Is this being delayed or is this live?
I don't think it's going out live.
Okay, so any mention of any minor thing could be good action.
I'll let him know.
Sorry.
Yes, sir. Victoria was the only one who gave us a written statement. It was a verbal interview with Ms. Mims and Mr. Barnes. Mr. Barnes said that Jessica previously has left for extended periods of time, so he wasn't concerned about her being gone at this point. Ms. Mims had very little to say. It's very deferential toward Mr. Barnes. After we got a written statement, that concluded the missing persons investigation. What we had very little at that point. Investigation continued over the following days. We got information from Ronald Herron that he had tracking devices, personally, that he had put on vehicles that were registered to Brandon Barnes.
Can I stop you for just a second? Can you tell the court who Ronald Herron is?
He is the grandfather of Kendall.
Okay.
He's the property owner of 102 Laurel.
And what's the relationship between 102 Laurel, where all of the defendants live in there, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So 102 Laurel has a main house on it, which is where Mr. Herron resides, and there's a pool house on the property as well, which is where Barnes, Mims, Tippett, and minor child were residing.
All right, let's go back to those trackers. Mr. Herron had trackers on these vehicles?
On the Chevy HHR registered to Brandon Barnes and a Kia registered, I believe it was in Mr. Herron's name, but it was used by Kendall Mims.
And just for the court's knowledge, those trackers were on these vehicles prior to law enforcement ever being involved in this case?
Yes, sir. Law enforcement had nothing to do with the trackers.
Why did he put the trackers on the vehicles?
What he told us was that because he had a financial interest in them, he was the lien holder, paid for the vehicles. And there was some type of issue from Mr. Barnes' previous relationship that he didn't feel safe with Kendall. And there was some other incident that we were not involved in, so he put the trackers on these two vehicles.
Okay. I'm going to jump a little bit. So eventually Mrs. Barnes's body, it goes from a missing person case to a murder, correct?
Yes, sir.
And how did y'all discover that?
Based on the tracker information from these vehicles, we were able to learn that the vehicles, particularly the HHR, had made multiple trips from the Laurel Drive address out to a location on Twin Lakes Drive, which is in Pickens County. And at this particular location, there's a pathway which leads down to Lake Hartwell, some type of quarry. And where we found there were multiple trips for extended periods, starting on August 1st to I believe August 4th or 5th, where the vehicle's out there for, anywhere from a half an hour to, more than 2 hours at a time. And then the vehicle would return to Laurel Drive and then go back to this particular location on Twin Lakes Road. So with that information, seeing that there's no activity on Jessica Barnes' social media accounts, no activity on various cell phones, mother, with the initial report being she hadn't heard from her daughter in over a month, and had received no phone calls, no text messages. From that information, we put together a plan to go search the location using various resources, including a canine cadaver dog, which is not law enforcement, it's a private entity. We did that on September 19th, out at the location around where the tracker indicated the vehicle had been for extended periods. During the course of this search, we had multiple search teams in a number of locations. Officer Bishop and an officer from Clemson University found a location which indicated something had been burned off of the trail. Would have been no more than a quarter mile, I'm thinking, from the parking area where the HHR had been repeatedly. I was with the canine cadaver dog, made our way over to that location, and the cadaver dog made an indication that there were human remains there. A coroner, Candy Kelly from Pickens County, was contacted. She came to the scene. She indicated that there seemed to be human remains. A Clemson University professor of licensee, also an anthropologist, came out to the scene. She searched through the burned pile, and she said that yes, there were human remains in this pile. So from that point, the scene was secured. It was getting later in the afternoon. Pickens County stayed on the scene. SLED, who was also involved in this search, they came out on the following day, on the 20th.
I'm gonna stop you right there. Can you whose human remains did those end up being?
Ultimately, they were the dental remains which were found in the pile. There were 3 teeth and a piece of a jawbone. It was determined to be the remains of Jessica Barnes.
And there's limited remains just from them being burned, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were there any other remains found in any other locations?
Yes, sir. Following this search on the 20th, ultimately there was a search warrant conducted following interview with the 3 suspects on the 1st of October when they were ultimately arrested. And during their interviews, Victoria Tippett had said that there was a bucket, like a 5-gallon bucket that was out at the property at 102 Laurel Drive, which also contained some of Jessica Barnes' remains.
I want to, thank you for that. I want to jump now to, we know that there was a murder that took place. Can you tell the court how Ms. Tippett and Ms. Mims either learned of the murder, had knowledge of the murder, who was there, who wasn't there, that sort of thing?
Yes, sir. So when the murder took place in the residence, Victoria Tippett was there with a minor child when the murder took place by Brandon Barnes.
And what was the manner of death? How was she killed?
She was choked to death.
And how did you learn of that?
Ultimately, it was through the interviews.
Okay, so basically the defendants confessed to her being strangled?
Yes, sir, on 1 October. There were a number of interviews prior to that where they had ample opportunity to tell us what had taken place, and they had never confessed to what had happened.
Okay, and now I just want to be clear on who was present when the murder took place.
Brandon Barnes strangled Jessica Barnes. Victoria Tippett was present with the minor child.
So Ms. Tippett's knowledge of the murder was that she witnessed the murder, basically.
Firsthand, she was in the room when it took place.
And where was Ms. Mims at the time of the murder?
She was at work.
Okay, so she wasn't on location when
She
the
was
murder
not
took place?
present when the murder took place.
Okay, now I want you to tell the court a little bit about how Ms. Mims came to learn of the murder.
It was determined that she was told what had happened when she came home from work, and at this point, Jessica Barnes' remains had already been placed into a large Rubbermaid type tote that was purchased by Brandon Barnes and Victoria Tippett using Kendall Mims' debit card at the Central Walmart.
And so her body was in a plastic tote, is that what?
Yes, sir.
And when was the tote that the body went into purchased, before or after the murder?
After the murder.
Okay. And how did y'all come to find out that they had purchased it at Walmart?
Sledge agent Kevin Tyner had found that there was audio or video surveillance of the purchase at the Walmart, and you could see Brandon Barnes, Victoria Tippett walking out of the Walmart with a tote and a shovel that they had purchased on top of it.
And that was prior to Kendall Mims having knowledge that this murder had taken place, correct?
At the time the tote was purchased, yes.
She hadn't returned home from work at that time when they had purchased the tote, correct?
That I'm not sure about.
Okay. But ultimately, Kendall came home from work.
Correct.
And how did she learn of the murder?
She was told by Brandon
Okay.
Barnes and Victoria Tippett what had taken place.
Okay. All right, now that they all know that this incident has taken place, walk the court through their actions from, the time the murder took place until you've already testified to her body eventually being burned. Tell the court a little bit about how they got from the pool house with the body to the Twin Lakes Road location.
So Mr. Heron also has a ring camera system at his residence. You can, at some point, you can see the tote being brought out of the pool house by Brandon Barnes with the assistance of Ms. Mims and Victoria Tippett due to the dead weight of the body being in the tote. It's put in the HHR. Again, it's driven around. Apparently, what they told us was they were searching for a location to dispose of the remains before they ultimately ended at the location on Twin Lakes Road in Pickens County.
And did the tracking devices show y'all them driving around?
Yes, sir.
But they also, in their statements and interviews, explain this process?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, let's tell the court how they eventually picked Twin Lakes Road.
From what Brandon Barnes had said, it was a location, well, they had checked the location in Georgia and determined that it wasn't a good location for whatever their reasoning was. Ended up at the Twin Lakes location. According to Mr. Barnes, it was the first place Jessica Barnes had gone on a date, so it had some kind of sentimental value to him. They tried to dig using the shovel they had purchased at Walmart, and we were able to find that spot where they had tried to dig on the trail, before determining that they couldn't dig or get through the hard packed dirt, at which point they made the determination to burn the remains. And while this was taking place, and again, it was a number of trips that they made out there, we have text messages between Victoria Mims and Victoria Tippett and Kendall Mims, that Kendall Mims was out at the roadway keeping watch while Victoria Tippett and Brandon Barnes were at the remain site attempting to dispose of the body.
And did they, so all three of the co-defendants were at the Twin Lakes Road location?
Yes, sir.
Was there any other time that they were at the Twin Lakes Road location that you know of?
Multiple times.
Okay.
I roughly 10 times between the time of the murder and when we discovered it.
Was the car data, the tracker data, the only evidence that you had with them out there? But you also had the text messages. Was there anything else that showed that they were out there?
Nothing I'm aware of.
Okay. When did SLED get involved in this case? When it became a missing persons case?
No, sir. It would have been a few days later. I want to say it was roughly the 14th of September when Mr. Heron told us about the trackers being on the vehicles.
Okay. And you mentioned the Ring doorbell cameras, and I apologize if you've already went over it, but can you tell the court what the Ring doorbell cameras captured the night of the incident?
I'm not positive of the exact dates right now, but at various times, Kendall Mims is seen carrying gas cans, which would have been stored behind the pool house. I believe they were blue gas cans. And SLED was able to determine that an accelerant was used at the burn site. And at some point, as I said earlier, it wasn't just a burn site. There were cut trees that were placed over the burn site. And Mr. Heron has a battery-operated saw, which you can see on the camera, was taken from under the carport and then brought back.
Okay. I'm going to jump back to the bucket. Would the bucket with the remains in it, bucket already at Mr. Heron's home, or was it purchased at some point, or are you aware of that?
They had purchased a bucket at Lowe's as well as a 50-pound bag of, I don't think it was Quikrete, but that type of product. And then ultimately, the remains were put in a different bucket, not the bucket they had purchased at Lowe's.
And who was present when they purchased that bucket and the concrete?
All three parties were at the Lowe's.
Okay. And in their interviews, did all three parties know what was in that bucket once you all discovered it?
Yes, sir. We would not have known about the bucket had they not told us the bucket was there, because the bucket, we had to obtain a separate search warrant following the interviews, and the bucket was away from where the pool house was. It was in a kind of hidden under some not debris, but some overgrowth that was there at the property.
Okay. I just have a few more questions for you. Between the time of the death and the time of their arrest, you mentioned that the defendants went down to, did you say Georgia?
Yes, sir.
Did they go anywhere else in that window of time between August 1st and when they were arrested, I believe October the 1st or so?
Yes, sir. I want to say it was around September 14th, 15th. Mr. Heron had called me and said that, wanted to let me know that they were up in Tennessee. And he had this information via the tracker, which he had already given permission to us, both verbally and in writing, to use his login information. Following his phone call, I did log in and saw that they had made a trip from Pendleton up to Tennessee, and then ultimately they drove west across Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, ultimately staying in Colorado. Mr. Herron said, because Mr. Herron is co-owner of a banking account with Ms. Mims, he said that he could see that they had a room booked in Colorado for 2 days. They checked out after the first day and then came back to Pendleton.
And why'd they go out there? A vacation or?
What they said was they went to Tennessee for vacation. Why they went further, ultimately they told us it was due to the pressure they were receiving via social media and our questioning.
Was there any video at the burn site?
Yes, sir. So following the information that they had gone west, we had already located the burn site. And when we saw that they were returning and getting fairly close to South Carolina, SLED put a trail camera out at the recovery site. And upon their return to Pendleton, one of the first things they did was went out to the burn site, and on the trail camera you can see with the tracker information, the vehicle goes to the burn site. They get out, they walk right to the burn site, and where their images are captured looking at where the burn site had been.
Okay. I have 2 or 3 more questions. Was there any blood at the scene of the murder that you know of?
The initial search and then following search didn't indicate anything with the various means that SLED forensics used, but during the interview, Victoria had stated that she and Brandon had gone to Food Line to purchase bleach, and there were 2 other products, I can't recall off the top of my head, but they had obtained those because following the strangling, that some type of fluid had come out of Jessica's mouth, so they used that. They made these purchases to clean up that small spot.
Okay, and that was Victoria and Brandon.
Yes, sir.
And you've already testified to it a little bit, but y'all spoke to the 3 defendants multiple times between the time of the murder and the time they were arrested, correct?
Yes, sir.
And were they truthful with y'all throughout that time?
Negative.
They were not truthful.
No.
And they never told you what actually happened until the interviews right before they were arrested.
October 1st, yes, sir.
While Miss Barnes was missing, did the defendants do anything in the community to sort of look like they were looking for her? Does that make sense to you?
Yes, sir. One evening, I was transferred a phone call from Brandon Barnes where he was asking if he could get the missing person flyer that the town had created, and he was told that he could print it off the town website. He also, the 3 of them, Brandon, Victoria, and Kendall, at some point met with a reporter in the downtown square area. Brandon was apparently carrying the remains of his deceased child, and spoke with the reporter, indicating that they were attempting to search for Jessica.
Did Brandon ask y'all for flyers for her missing persons case? Was that after the ultimate date of that Miss Barnes had died?
Well after.
Okay. And Did Miss Tippett or Miss Mims have any activity in regards to putting out missing persons flyers?
I don't know that they put out any flyers, but they were with him when they met with the reporter.
And that was when he was putting out flyers, is that correct?
I don't know that he put out flyers.
Okay,
He was told that he could print them off. I don't know if he did or not.
okay. But, so why did, they met with the reporter to talk about her being missing? Is that
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and all three of them were there at that time speaking with
Yes,
the
sir.
reporter? Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to inform the court of related to these warrants?
No, sir.
I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you, everybody. Please support. Thank you for being here today, Officer Westcott. You said earlier in your testimony that the missing persons report was filed by Ms. Rivera on September
10th.
10th. Okay. And there was nothing from anyone else before that date?
Yes, ma'am.
There was. Okay.
No, there was nothing else.
Okay, sorry. So September 10th, and you said the first thing y'all did was you went to 102 Laurel Drive,
Yes, ma'am.
and you spoke to all three parties?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and were you there personally, or did you watch any of the interviews?
I was there.
And did you speak to them alone, or were they together?
When we initially made contact, all three of them were inside the residence. Eventually, Officer Middlecom in Victoria asked her to step outside with her to speak with them, or with her, while myself, Officer Bishop, were speaking with Ms. Mims and Brandon Barr inside the residence.
Okay, so Ms. Mims was inside with Mr. Barnes?
Correct.
Thank you. Now, when you got word about the missing persons case, and after you went out and spoke to the parties, did you have an opportunity to run like a background check on these individuals?
At that point, there was no need. All we had was a missing persons case.
Okay. And do you know whether or not police ever went to this scene 102 Laurel Drive before the September 17th?
I've been there.
For what reasons?
I was there in 2023, I don't remember the exact date, I think it was October. There was a report where Officer Carpenter was investigating an incident. I don't recall the exact incident, but I went there to make contact while he was out on Jackson Street talking to, I believe it was Ms. Rivera. I'm not positive who he was talking to. I never went to Jackson Street in 2023 on that incident. But he asked me to go to Laurel, where I made contact, my body cam. You can see Brandon Barnes, Jessica Barnes, Jessica Barbar at the time, and Kendall Mims were there.
Okay. And were you aware of Ms. Barnes' stillborn baby?
During the course of the investigation, we became aware of it, yes.
Okay. And at what point in time did you learn about prior domestic violence incidences that had occurred at that residence?
We never had any reports of domestic violence incidents at the residence.
Okay. But when you looked up information about Mr. Barnes, at whatever point that you did you find that there were hints and instances that looked like domestic violence had occurred?
Not with these parties. We did learn that he had been arrested for domestic violence in the state of Maine.
And that he also had a juvenile record for something along those lines as well?
Yes.
Okay. So you said that during this investigation, you did become aware of the stillborn.
Yes, ma'am.
And were you privy to those medical records?
During the course of the investigation, we learned Anderson County Sheriff's Office had investigated that incident, had made a report on it, and we do have their report.
Okay, because in those medical records, as well as the deputy, Officer Free State, who responded, said They noticed bruising all over Mrs. Barnes' body, and Officer Free State mentioned it as well. I think at least one other officer went out and noticed Ms. Barnes' black eyes. Were you aware of that during your investigation?
We never had a report of a domestic violence incident.
Okay. So, at any point in time, did you attempt to triangulate the phones between these individuals?
We ultimately, through the investigation, had search warrants, got all their phones, did the phone notes. We have all the phone information.
Okay, so you did do
Triangulation, no, that was not part of it.
Okay. Is that not something that's done when there's a missing persons report?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right. Now, you said that there were forensics of the phones,
Yes, ma'am.
and did you get a warrant for those forensics?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And you got it yourself or someone else did?
Multiple officers were working on it. I believe the phone dump warrants were obtained by Officer Delco.
Okay. Now, at any point in time, did you attempt to speak to the victim out of Maine?
She called, yes, ma'am.
She did call?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you speak to her?
Yeah, at some point, let me back that up. I don't know that I spoke to her. I believe Officer Biddlecom spoke to her.
And did she express concerns about strangulation?
As far as I know of, yes.
Okay. And did you have an opportunity to ever question Ms. Mims by herself?
During the course of the investigation, we spoke with all of them multiple times.
But did you ever have an opportunity to speak to her by herself?
They were always together.
And where was the minor trial when this was occurring?
You talking about the murder?
No. I know where she was. Where was the minor trial when you were questioning Ms. Mims?
Which time?
Any of the times?
I believe she was typically in the care of Mr. Herron.
Okay. All right, so, but you said that you did end up, when you said that they were together, are you meaning Mr. Barnes and Ms. Mims were together? He was there, or did you mean somebody else was Ms. Mims?
Typically, it was always Ms. Tippett, Ms. Mims, Mr. Barnes.
Okay.
He was a very controlling individual, we found.
Now, I know you said you had an opportunity to speak to her grandfather, Mr. Herron,
Yes.
on several occasions, and he was really helpful solving the case. Did you by chance get a search warrant for the GPS trackers at any point in time?
I believe that SLED had taken one of those, yeah. I believe.
Okay.
Or if not the warrant, Mr. Herron had given us permission. Both verbally and in writing, as I stated.
And you stated earlier that Mr. Herron was not on Mr. Barnes' title, but he is.
He's on the HHR, registered to Mr. Barnes, and on the Kia, which I believe is registered to Mr. Herron with Ms. Mims as well.
Did you have an opportunity to review the ring camera?
I did not review the ring cameras. That SLED
Okay.
did the review of the ring cameras.
And then based upon their report, based upon their report about what occurred on the ring cameras, you made decisions about the case?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, how many times have you worked with domestic violence victims or responded to domestic violence calls?
Over the course of 16 years, I can't give you a number.
Right.
Many times.
And so I am going to assume, and I would like for you to correct me if I'm wrong, that you've gotten some domestic violence training?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you concerned at all about domestic violence in the house? At any point in time?
No, we, like again, as I said, we have never received a call to the Laurel Drive address for an incident. I believe it was 4 calls roughly to the Jackson Street address where Ms. Barnes' mother resided, and Miss Barnes, Jessica Bavara at the time, had resided there.
But during the course of your investigation, when you discovered probably some pretty alarming information, did you start to wonder if there was any domestic violence present at 102 Laurel Drive?
With which parties? We're talking three
All
different
of them?
females.
Any of them?
We never had any indication that there was domestic violence. At some point, Ms. Rivara, Cecilia Rivara, Jessica's mother, told us about an incident in November, probably 23, where she said that she believed Jessica had been the victim of domestic violence, but it had been a call that had been handled by the sheriff's office. So Pendleton Police Department, as I said, had never received a report of domestic violence.
Now, that's interesting. So I know that police did respond because of domestic violence at 102 Laurel. Is there a reason why Pendleton wasn't notified of it?
It would depend on the day that it would have been reported. Pendleton Police Department, after 2 a.m. Saturday morning until 8 a.m. Monday morning, Pendleton Police Department is off duty. So if it occurs Saturday, Sunday, into Monday morning, it's Anderson County Sheriff's Office's response.
Okay. But you said that you went to Ms. Barbara's residence and that you had to take Mrs. Barnes, Jessica, to a hospital?
We didn't take her, the ambulance took her to the hospital.
And that was July 31st?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you find out any information more about that during the course of your investigation? Because obviously she was in the hospital and then you assumed that the date of the murder was either the 1st or the 2nd?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know how she got from the hospital to back to 102 Laurel?
From the statements we received, Jessica Barnes had her phone while she was being transported via ambulance to admin. She was in contact with Brandon Barnes via text message. Once she was brought into the emergency room for mental health evaluation at admin, she ultimately decided to check herself out, left the hospital, was apparently walking around Anderson, still in communication with Brandon via phone, and he ultimately, on the morning of the 1st, drove to Anderson to pick her up and brought her back to Laurel Drive.
Was anybody in the car with him when he did that?
I couldn't tell you, ma'am.
Okay. Would that have shown up on the ring camera?
I can't answer that.
Okay. What about, were you ever aware that Mr. Barnes would drive Ms. Mims' car
Yes, ma'am.
without her in it?
I couldn't tell you if she would have been in it or not.
Okay, but maybe that would also be something that's on the ring camera? At any point in time during this investigation, did you speak to Mrs. Mims, excuse me, Mrs. Mims' family members from mom or dad?
No, ma'am.
So you're not aware, excuse me, that they had sought law enforcement services in North Carolina and Georgia trying to find their daughter?
Unaware of North Carolina, Georgia, yes, that was one of the indications, or that was one of the reasons that Mr. Heron said he put a tracker on the vehicle that she typically drove, was that Brandon Barnes and Kendall Mims at some point had gone down to Georgia, unknown where, family didn't have any contact with her, so when they came back, he had put the tracker on the vehicle so that that type of activity wouldn't happen again.
But in fact, the family had to report the car stolen so that they could find her, correct?
I couldn't tell you if the car was reported stolen.
Okay, so do you have any of those incident reports?
No, ma'am, it not reported to Pendleton PD.
So, you stated that there were several text messages that you saw on the phones, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And did Ms. Barbara make you aware that she suspected that Mr. Barnes had been texting her using Jessica's phone?
Are we talking about when she reported her as a missing person?
Yes.
Yes, so she said that the reason she was in to report her as a missing person was that she had not heard from Jessica on her birthday. And that, I don't remember the exact date, but she had gotten a text message allegedly from Jessica's phone, but she did not believe that it was sent from Jessica. Reading the text message, it read very strange. It was a long run-on sentence. And she also said that one of her sons had received a similar text message. Went to her residence, made contact with one of her minor sons, read the text message he had received, and it was very similar to the text message that Ms. Villar had received, other than the message he received had some punctuation in it, and the other indication from Ms. Villar was that Jessica typically used a number of emojis. Hers was a long run-on sentence, no emojis, and her son had some punctuation and emojis, but it read very similarly.
At any point in time, did you find out that Mr. Barnes regularly used Ms. Tippett, Ms. Mims, and Ms. Barnes' phones?
He apparently used all three of their phones as well as his.
And were you aware that he also did some of that with their social media?
Yes, ma'am.
At any point in time, did you realize that when you were saying that Ms. Tippett and Mr. Barnes went to Walmart to buy the plastic container, the shovel, and the Coca-Cola, you stated that they used Ms. Mims' debit card, correct?
Correct.
She was not there, correct?
She was not there when that purchase was made.
And that appeared to have taken place while she was at work,
Correct. Yes, she was not there.
prior to her learning about any of this. As far as you can tell, that was prior to her learning about any of this.
I don't know when she learned of the event.
All right.
Would have been after she returned home, but I can't tell you how long after she returned home that she was told.
At any point in time, did you notice that Mr. Barnes was funneling large amounts of money from Ms. Mims' account to his own?
What we found through the bank records was it seemed like as Ms. Mims would get paid, transfers were made from her account into Brandon Barr's account.
Was he doing that with anyone else?
Jessica Barnes had very little money, and we didn't see any indication that there was anything from Victoria Tippett.
Okay. And do you know how many jobs Ms. Mims was forced to work?
I believe she's working 2 jobs, at an Arby's, and then she had just started a job at a diner or some type of eating establishment on Clemson University.
And were you aware that at least one of her coworkers made a statement regarding injuries that she constantly saw on Ms. Mims?
Yes, one of the coworkers said that she had seen some type of injury on her body.
During the course of your investigation, did you learn that Mr. Barnes required Ms. Mims to either wear a headset or keep her phone on all the time so that he could listen to everything she did?
From the statements they had given me, while all of them, while Brandon was at work, he would be constantly on the phone with the parties, and Ms. Mims, while she was at work, she was apparently on the phone as well.
You stated earlier in your testimony that Ms. Mims rarely said much at all,
Yes, ma'am. Very differential.
and that was your experience with her as a whole.
Throughout the investigation, yes. Only time I ever really saw any type of emotion from her was in October 2023, when I had made contact with her, Jessica Bovar at the time, and Brandon Barnes.
right, now, do you know who had the relationship first with Mr. Barnes, where this began?
Miss Mims.
Okay. And do you know where that occurred? It's where it started.
No.
So, do you know when Ms. Barnes was introduced into this equation?
Toward the end of 2023.
Okay. And then, are you aware of when Ms. Tippett became involved?
July, like a couple weeks before this happened.
All right.
Ms. Wise, I just want to make sure, are you handling both cases?
No, I'm not.
I'll be quick, Your Honor.
Well, I just, when she mentioned Ms. Tippett, I just wanted to make sure that y'all were, you were handling both cases while,
No.
I wanted to stay as close to the charges as possible. I know I've allowed to go far afield, and I've allowed the solicitor's office, and I don't know that you're not calling on another buy-in.
This is our only witness, Your Honor.
So I just wanted to make sure, just wanted to make sure.
Thank you, Judge. I appreciate that. All right, so you did say that all three of the parties were at Lowe's, correct?
Yes, sir. Seen
And,
on surveillance.
all right, do you know who drove that day?
No, I did not.
So, you stated that Ms. Mims was not there during the commission of this crime.
Yes, ma'am.
And you said that during her interview, she gave you information that she knew what had happened?
During your interview, I was not present during the interview. I watched the interview recording. She ultimately initially stated that Jessica had left of her own volition. Nobody knew where she was, and then eventually told us what she had been told.
And what she had been told was that Jessica committed suicide.
Yes, ma'am.
And she said that numerous times?
Yes.
So, Miss Mims never said that she knew that Miss Barnes was murdered.
No, because she wasn't there. She said, again, she was telling us what she was told. She had disappeared, she had killed herself.
And did you ever uncover any evidence that Miss Mims was married to Brandon Barnes?
No, Mr. Barnes and Ms. Mims had obtained a wedding license, but had never.
Because just getting a marriage license isn't enough to get married in the state of South Carolina.
That they never had gotten married.
Did you ever uncover any information that the child that Miss Mims had with Mr. Barnes was a secret of any kind?
Not that we're aware of.
Were you aware that Miss Barnes was present when Miss Mims gave birth?
No, ma'am.
And were you ever able to uncover any kind of plot to kill Miss Barnes?
No.
Did you ever find anything regarding Miss Mims that she wanted to do this, thought about doing this, made a plan to do this?
There was never an indication, nothing during the investigation showed that there was a plan to kill her. We found numerous text messages amongst the parties that Ms. Mims and Mrs. Barnes didn't get along, but I would expect that.
Yes, I would place that blame squarely at Mr. Barnes' feet. I have no further questions.
Hey, please support, Your Honor. Just want to clear up one thing. At the beginning of your testimony, were you at the incident, the civil disturbance incident on July 31st?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about that civil, what kind of civil disturbance was it?
When Officer Bishop and I showed up, Mrs. Barnes, Jessica Barnes, was laying in the street, all her belongings with her, and it was at the residence next to her mother's address at 456 Jackson. At that time, both Brandon Barnes and Jessica Barnes were placed on trespass notice from 456 Jackson, where the mother and her other siblings resided. Brandon Barnes was present while we were dealing with that and then ultimately waiting for the ambulance to arrive. Ms. Mims had arrived on scene. She stayed separated from where we were dealing with Jessica and Brandon.
I mean, was that like a shouting match? Were they going at each other? What kind of, when you say civil disturbance, I'm just trying to get an idea of what was actually going on.
Apparently, Brandon had brought Jessica back to the residence with all her belongings, where he was leaving her, and his intention initially was he was leaving while we were on scene, and it was more than an hour. He wanted to bring her with him. She had made indications that she wanted to, Jessica had made indications that she wanted to hurt herself, which is when we asked for the ambulance to come on scene.
Was that incident recorded on body cam?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And was that turned over as part of this whole case file?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's go then now to the initial contact you had with Brandon, Victoria, and Kendall, where Victoria made the written statement. Was all of that on body cam and recorded?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and turned over to the solicitor's office?
Yes, sir.
All right, the GPS trackers on the cars. Now, when you initially answered the state's question, you said that Brandon Barnes was the registered owner of the HHR, and that then later, during the cross, you said Brandon Barnes and Mr. Herron, and I'm just trying to make sure I get this right. Was he actually registered owner, or was he just a co-signer on a loan?
Give me just a second.
No problem.
I believe I have it. I do not believe I have the registrations printed off. I believe Mr. Herron was a co-signer.
Okay.
Both vehicles.
If I told you that, looking at the tax records, that Brandon Barnes is the only listed person for the HHR, but that Mr. Herron and then Ms. Mims are on the registration for the Kia Forte, would that surprise you?
No.
Okay. And so were you able to, if Mr. Herron was on some sort of note, were you able to collect that note to verify that Mr. Herron had some sort of interest in the HHR?
I don't recall if we got that.
Okay. Because, you would agree that probably can't put trackers into random people's cars.
Correct.
Okay. Did you, what kind of GPS trackers were they? Were they like air tags? Were they magnetic devices?
I asked Mr. Herron about the device, and he didn't answer that question.
Okay.
And it wasn't our device, so honestly, I didn't care.
So, but once it became clear that the HHR and the Forte to some extent were used in furtherance of this investigation, Were those devices collected and put into evidence?
Negative.
Why not?
They were owned by Mr. Hammer.
All right. Just to get to some statements that I read, I believe in your interview with Mr. Herron, he described Brandon at one point as manipulative and narcissistic with women.
And if his lips are moving, he's lying.
And if his lips are moving, he's lying. Also, in an interview with Jessica's mother, talked about Jessica being physically abused by Brandon and then provided a picture, which I believe is actually in evidence that I've seen,
Yes.
of black eye. Do you remember interviewing a Julia Palmer, who dated Brandon between August and November of 2023? Believe she stated that Brandon had put a cigarette on her before they broke up.
It was a phone interview. And she had said that she had been involved with him for a short period of time, 2 or 3 months. At some point, he had put out a cigarette on one of her legs, asked her if she ever reported the incident. She said no.
Now,
How far are we going to go back in the?
we're not, I'm done with that.
In time?
This is as far back, that's my last question as far as that, and I've only got a few more, Your Honor. In your testimony, at the beginning, you said that you got to the Twin Lakes location based off the phone data, or the tracker data.
Yes, sir.
In your report, stated that a confidential source had said that Brandon was at Twin Lakes on August the 3rd. Was there a confidential source?
Mr. Hammer.
Mr. Herron. Okay, that clears that up. Just because it can be a little bit confusing at times, well, let me ask this first. You said that a private entity was used as, for the cadaver dog. Do you remember what entity that was?
No, it's not my head, sir.
Okay. And were they paid by the department? Were they paid by SLED? Do you have any of that information?
Voluntarily.
And you said that the remains were identified by dental ID based off the 3 teeth that were found.
The 3 teeth and a piece of the jaw.
Do you know who did that ID?
It's in the report.
Okay.
I saw the name last night, but I don't recall off the top of my head.
Was there any sort of DNA identification?
Ultimately, SLED did the DNA, yes, sir.
What actual, and you may not know every little piece, but what actual remains were collected from that burn site other than the piece of the jawbone with the teeth?
I can't answer that. While that search was being conducted out at Twin Lakes, myself and Officer Bishop were doing a search over at Lower Drive, so it was being conducted simultaneously.
Were any large remains found, larger bones?
Not that I'm aware of.
Now, during one of the interviews, I believe, maybe Ms. Tippett had said that they purchased bleach, clean up the bodily fluids.
Yes, sir.
It's my understanding that the pool house was carpeted.
Yes, sir.
Was there any evidence of any bleach being used, any bleached out areas?
Not when
When you searched?
SLED forensics, used their luminol and whatever else they used.
Okay, so to your knowledge, there was no areas of carpet like it looked like someone poured bleach on?
No, sir.
Part of your report mentions that you had received a tip on September 19th regarding a potential sighting of Jessica Barnes at the Dollar General. Was that ever reviewed, or was video ever pulled from that Dollar General at that point in time?
No, sir. I conducted that interview on the phone, and when I asked the gentleman if he would, how certain he was, he said, yeah, I don't remember the percentage he gave, and I said, well, would it change your mind any if I told you that we had evidence that would indicate that you did not see what you believe you saw? And he said, no, he was pretty sure that he had seen Miss Barnes.
Okay. And that would have been before 9/20, I'm sorry, that would have been before Miss Barnes would have been identified though.
Positively identified, yes, sir.
Did you ever get that individual's name?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so his information is in a report?
Is in the report, yes, sir.
Okay. What about the identification of a woman, I believe she's described as looking haggard and smoking a Marlboro cigarette, that was seen on September 20th. And who said that she collected, I believe, 3 trash bags worth of stuff from the area?
Right.
Was she ever identified?
No, sir, again, on the 20th, this was information that was reported to me, I put it in a report. Information I received was that a SLED agent was stopped by this woman as she was driving by and said that she had found a number of trash bags at some location.
Okay, but there was no idea what was in the trash bags, whether they were trash, whether they were potential evidence, whether they were
No, sir.
remains?
And she was never identified, nor the vehicle.
And then, I guess my last question would be, do you remember Ms. Mims giving a statement to police that basically said that Brandon had told Ms. Mims and Ms. Tippett that if they had talked to police or said anything about this, that basically they were all going down with it?
That was their statement, yes, sir.
Court, for one quick second, Your Honor. I have no further questions for this witness.
I have 2 or 3 follow-ups if you'll allow me. Officer Westcott, in Ms. Wise's questioning, she was a little bit unsure on the date of the actual murder and when it took place. So I just want to run through some stuff that I've gathered from the reports and in my discussions with law enforcement. The civil disturbance happened on 7/31, correct?
Correct.
And then
On Jackson Street.
Then at some point early on 8/1, that's when Miss Barnes is wandering around the downtown Anderson area.
Yes, sir.
And on 8/1, Mr. Barnes picks her up, correct?
Yes, sir.
So,
O'clock in the morning-ish.
okay. And then 8/1 passes by and there's, in my review of the evidence, there's the HHR or the Kia, one of the two's door dashing late at night on 8/1. Does that sound correct to you, if you
Yes.
know of that? Okay. And then we go into 8/2 and Kendall leaves for work. And let me take one step back. On 8/1, we've got Jessica on Ring doorbell camera and Brandon returning back to the pool house.
Yes, sir.
And then on 8/2, Kendall leaves for work and Jessica is alive. Is that correct?
Sounds correct.
Okay. You said it sounds correct. Are you not 100% sure? Or you?
I believe that is the
Okay.
case.
And then, so Kendall goes to work on 8/2 and she's alive. Kendall returns on 8/2 and that's when she sees Jessica's body in the plastic bin, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it seems as though she was murdered sometime between when Kendall left for work, the morning of the 2nd, and she comes home from work after, 5 o'clock on the 2nd.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, the next thing I want to go to is also in Ms. Wise's questioning is she talked about how Kendall never actually said that she knew that Brandon choked Jessica to death. That's what the questioning was, correct?
Yes, sir.
But in her interview, did she ultimately admit to Brandon telling her what happened?
Yes, sir.
And so what did Kendall, in her interview, finally, after telling a few stories that weren't exactly true, what did Kendall say Brandon told her?
That he was trying to restrain her in some type of WWE move where his arm had come around her neck, and that's how she had been choked, strangled.
And that's what Kendall told law enforcement in her interview.
Correct.
So she ultimately told you.
The manner in which it took place.
Okay. Did she make any sort of did she make any demonstrations of what Brandon told her that you know of?
Kendall did not. Victoria did.
Victoria did, okay. All right, and let me go to, you said you did not collect, this is now Mr. Williams' question, you did not collect the physical trackers?
Correct.
Mr. Herron either still has them or something along those
As
lines?
far as I know.
Okay, but did y'all extract and review the data from those trackers?
Yes, sir. SLED got that data.
And y'all have that data?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's the ultimate data that shows you where the remains were?
Yes, sir.
And who, I think you testified to it, just to make sure, who positively identified the remains? Because there weren't many remains. Who positively identified them?
Give me a second. I don't have it right here. It was an email, whomever the remains were sent to identify had emailed the Anderson County coroner. Once the coroner, or it might have been Pickens County coroner, Kendall Kelly, once they had the email, that was when the plan was made to pick the three up for the interview, now that we had positively identified the woman as Jessica Barnes.
And I don't know the name either, just sitting here, but wasn't it someone at Clemson University that had to look at the remains just due to the state they were in?
Professor Weisensee, who had come out to the scene initially, I positively identified human remains on the 20th of September. I'm sorry, 19th of September, the initial search. The ultimate positive identification of the dental remains, that was sent to someone who was in Georgia.
Okay.
I believe it's Georgia.
But those dental remains were Jessica's, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then this is my last question. Mr. Bloom was talking about the bleach and the bleach being purchased and there not really being much evidence of bleach, but my understanding is that in Kendall Mims' interview, she told law enforcement that when she came back to the house, it smelled like the room had been bombed with bleach. Does
Yes.
that sound correct to you?
Yes, sir. I've
And
never
that-
seen that stuff.
And that Brandon said that he had bombed the room for bugs.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Brief redirect, Your Honor.
I'm sorry?
I said a brief redirect, Your Honor.
Okay.
I'm so very sorry. During Ms. Mims' interview, she also said that it smelled very strongly of like ant killer or bleach. Do you remember her saying that exactly?
Yes, ma'am.
So it could have been either one. She wasn't exactly sure.
Yes, ma'am.
And last question. During Ms. Mims' interview, she did state that Mr. Barnes had tried to restrain Mrs. Barnes.
Yes, ma'am.
But she stated over and over and over again that Mrs. Barnes was still moving when Mr. Barnes left the room. Or is that incorrect?
That, I'm not sure, again, I wasn't present during her interview, and she wasn't present during the incident.
All right. Okay. All right, thank you. No further questions?
And I have a question.
One question, why did you get the accessory after the fact and mispresent of a felony? Aren't they the same elements, except one is murder, A, B, C, and the other one is just felony?
Honestly, Your Honor, I had never heard of his prison. SLED spoke with the solicitor. Solicitor said, go forward with these charges.
Is that what y'all want to do? Y'all going,
Judge, it's my understanding that we are aware of the accessory and the misprision issue, and that there's a possibility there's some case law saying you cannot be guilty of those two. That's my representation to you right now.
you would have to elect the charge.
I believe that's correct.
The solicitor, you can say,
And my also our understanding is that the jury could pick between the two at a trial, and that it can't be both. So,
Yeah, Judge, if we ultimately go to trial on this case, you have to look at them in a vacuum, and of course it'll all depend on the testimony that comes out and ultimately what the jury decides. But you can, the circuit court can structure the jury instructions so that they, if they pick one, or if they don't pick one, they'd move on to the next one and vice versa.
Both have to be indicted no matter what.
Yes, sir.
So I know it's a preliminary hearing,
And that's way on down the line.
that's way down the line, but I'm just not sure why. Roughly saying one is common law and one is codified, as far as I consider.
I would say that the accessory part is more of an active role, and then the misprision of a felony is more of a neglect of duty aspect of it. So I think the defense would make some arguments.
You can have a felony without being an ABC felony. There is a lesser felony, but that's not included in accessory. These may be semantical arguments anyway. Anything about on the lines?
Just briefly, Your Honor, the only evidence they have on Ms. Mims knowing about this murder occurring was based upon her own testimony in her interview that she gave willingly and voluntarily misled to law enforcement. However, at no point in time during her interview did she state that she actually knew that Brandon Barnes killed Jessica Barnes. And her statement over and over and over again was that, as far as she knew, Mrs. Barnes was still alive, even after Brandon tried to subdue her. Based upon that, I would ask that you consider dismissing the accessory after the fact of murder, because the only evidence they have that she knew that it was a murder was based upon what she said, that she knew that he restrained her, that she did testify or state over and over again that Mrs. Barnes was still alive once the restraining was over with. And Judge, to be guilty of accessory after the fact of murder, she would have to know that there was a murder that occurred.
Nothing.
And Judge, I would just respond to the motion related to accessory is that I would agree that you have to acknowledge that a felony has occurred. When you come home from work and there's a deceased person inside of a plastic tote, and then you tell law enforcement that that person who committed the murder ultimately demonstrated for you how they choked them, and you demonstrate that choke for law enforcement, and then a murder charge is ultimately brought, that it just sort of defies logic that you don't know that a felony has occurred and that a murder has occurred, Your Honor.
All right. I do find probable cause on all three charges for both entities. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
The system's rigged, man, it's time to break free. Eyes wide open, gotta see what I see. Standing on the front lines, fighting for the truth. Lift the veil of lies, it's time to be the proof. Take a stand, don't you back down. Raise your voice, let's shake the town. We're the voices that won't be ignored. Breaking chains, yeah, we're ready for war. With the power of the people, we'll make them see a world of justice, united and free. United and free. United and free. Marching with a purpose, we're taking it higher. Fighting through the struggle, igniting the fire. No more silence, we'll make the noise loud. Together in this battle, standing strong and proud. Injustice fades when courage aligns. Rise up together, break the confines. We're the voices that won't be ignored. Breaking chains, yeah, we're ready for war. With the power of the people, we'll make them see a world of justice, united and free. United and free. United and free. So rise up now, it's our time to shine. Together we'll write a new paradigm. You paradigm, you paradigm. Whoa, whoa. We're the voices that won't